The first royal gift Marivelle ever received hit her directly on the forehead. It was not a rose, not a ribbon, and not any poetic nonsense the palace singers used to ruin evenings. It was a silver cufflink with the Alpha King's crest on it, dropped from a height of 20 feet by a hunting falcon with the cold precision of a military commander. Mara was kneeling on the floor of the royal mews at the time, elbow deep in straw, lemon oil, and despair after discovering that hawks could aim. The cufflink bounced off her brow, landed in the clean feed tray, and flashed once in the morning light. From the highest beam, the silver-gray falcon folded his wings with great satisfaction. In Mara's mind, his voice arrived sharp, proud, and entirely unwelcome. Courtship gift delivered. Female struck cleanly. Excellent start. Mara closed her eyes. She had been awake since before dawn. She had scrubbed 3 perches, refilled 7 water bowls, and negotiated with a kestrel who believed dried rabbit was beneath her dignity. She did not have the emotional room for a royal falcon with romantic ambitions that apparently involved head trauma. That, she whispered, keeping her voice low, is not how gifts work. The falcon's golden eyes narrowed. Impact increases noticeability. Mara pressed 2 fingers to the tender spot above her eyebrow and considered, not for the first time, whether silence might have been a better life. Most people in Briarfall Palace thought she was only the floor girl of the royal mews, the one who swept feathers, polished brass rings, washed blood from leather gloves, and smelled faintly of soap, straw, and raw meat. That was the version of herself she worked very hard to maintain. The birds knew better. The birds knew everything. The sparrows knew which kitchen maid watered the wine. The pigeons knew which nobleman cried in the East Garden after losing at cards. The ravens knew where all the shiny things were hidden and had opinions about almost all of them. The royal falcon, Valor, knew more than any bird had a right to know, mostly because he belonged to Alpha King Alaric Vane. And Alaric Vane trusted him more than he trusted most breathing humans. Mara had spent 2 years pretending she could not hear Valor. Valor had spent 2 years pretending he respected that. Neither of them was doing well this morning. The mews smelled of clean straw, oiled leather, cold stone, and the coppery bite of raw quail. Sunlight came through the narrow high windows in pale gold bars. Birds shifted on their perches, bells chiming softly at their feet. Somewhere near the back, a raven named Ink was attempting to open a latch with the confidence of a criminal who had already considered the consequences and found them boring. Mara picked the cufflink out of the feed tray and wiped it on her apron. It was unmistakably royal. Heavy silver, black enamel, the Vane wolf crest engraved so finely that the tiny teeth looked annoyed. No servant in the palace could touch something like this without being accused of theft, treason, or having aspirations above her station. Mara had no aspirations above her station. Her current aspiration was to return the cufflink before someone decided she had seduced the king through the aggressive use of poultry housing. Valor dropped from the beam and landed on his perch with a proud snap of wings. "He has been impossible for weeks," the falcon informed her, brooding at windows, inspecting nothing, standing near your work corridor without stated purpose. Male requires assistance. Mara stood slowly. "The king requires many things," she murmured. "A council with fewer arguments. A cook who does not overboil pheasant. Possibly sleep. He does not require assistance from a falcon who throws jewelry at servants." Valor clicked his beak. "Incorrect. He requires mate acquisition." Mara dropped the cufflink. It hit the stone floor with a tiny bright sound. Every bird in the mews went quiet, which was never a good sign. Birds loved noise. Birds considered silence something that happened to other creatures shortly before being eaten. Mara crouched quickly and grabbed the cufflink again, because panic was no reason to leave royal property unattended near Ink the Raven. "No," she told Valor, "absolutely not." The falcon lifted 1 foot, inspected his talons, and sounded personally wounded. Denial is common in early courtship. Mara was still trying to decide whether one could resign from life when the outer door of the mews opened. The temperature in the room seemed to change. It always did when Alpha King Alaric Vane entered a space. The birds felt it first. Wings tightened. Heads turned. Even Ink removed his beak from the latch and pretended he had never been considering escape. The king's presence moved through the mews like winter crossing water. Alaric stepped inside wearing a dark riding coat, black gloves, and the expression of a man who had personally disapproved of the morning. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and handsome in the severe way of old statues. His dark hair was tied back at the nape. Pale, storm-gray eyes swept over the room. Then they landed on Mara. More specifically, they landed on the cufflink in her hand. Vaylor straightened on his perch. Mail has arrived to witness gift acceptance. Posture acceptable. Facial softness deficient. Mara tightened her fist around the cufflink. Your Majesty, she said, dipping into the quick curtsy used by low servants who hoped to remain furniture. Alaric's gaze moved from her face to Vaylor and back again. Nothing in his expression changed, but the silence thickened in a way that suggested he had noticed the tiny red mark on her forehead. I lost a cufflink, he said. His voice was low, controlled, and carried the kind of authority that made guards straighten 3 rooms away. Vaylor was unimpressed. He lost nothing. I selected it. Mara held out the cufflink with both hands. Vaylor found it. The falcon made a sharp sound. Gifted it. Dropped it, Mara corrected under her breath. Alaric's eyes narrowed slightly. Did you say something? No, Your Majesty. Vaylor's head tilted. Female lies smoothly under pressure. Strong trait. Mara stared very hard at the king's cuff. Alaric took the cufflink from her palm. His gloved fingers did not touch her skin. No one touched the Alpha King. Palace law lived in that distance. A cook had once tried to brush ash from his sleeve and nearly fainted when a guard barked her name. A visiting lord who clapped his shoulder spent the rest of the reception pale, though Alaric had done nothing worse than look at him. He let no one close. Not servants, not nobles, not counselors, not healers. Only Vaylor sat on his arm. The falcon now puffed his chest. Observe. I have established shared object exchange. Next stage requires repeated proximity. Mara decided she did not like the word stage. Alaric refastened the cufflink with one hand. It should have been impossible, but kings performed small impossible tasks because no one told them they could not. He glanced at the mark on her forehead. You are injured. It is only a bump. Valor gave a low, approving whistle. Gift landed with sufficient force to leave memory. Mara made the mistake of looking up at the falcon. Alaric saw it. His attention sharpened. Valor has been restless. Mara still felt the cufflink in her palm. She chose each word carefully. She suggested more flight time. When Alaric replied that Valor had flown at dawn, Mara carefully revised the prescription to less flight time. Something happened at the corner of Alaric's mouth. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of one, immediately disciplined into non-existence. Valor saw it anyway. There, facial softness achieved. Female effective. Mara bit the inside of her cheek. The king looked at her as if she were a puzzle among the water buckets. Mara looked at the floor as if it contained answers. The floor offered nothing. After a moment, Alaric turned to Valor. Come. Vaylor stepped onto his gloved wrist with royal dignity. As the king moved toward the door, the falcon twisted his head back to Mara. Training begins tomorrow. Prepare for additional gifts. Mara's stomach dropped. Alaric paused at the threshold, perhaps because Vaylor had leaned so far around that the bells at his feet chimed. Is he bothering you? Mara had no idea how to answer that without ending her life as she knew it. He is very determined, Your Majesty. Vaylor clicked his beak in satisfaction. Accurate. Alaric looked at the bird, then at Mara. For one strange second, the cold edge of him softened. Not much. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But Mara worked with birds. She knew the difference between a creature at rest and a creature considering flight. "Yes," he said. "He is." Then he left, taking Winter and the cufflink and a deeply self-satisfied falcon with him. Mara stood alone in the royal mews, surrounded by birds who were pretending not to have enjoyed the entire thing. Ink the Raven finally spoke from the back. "If gifts now include impact, I have several pebbles and a grudge." Mara covered her face with both hands. By noon, the cufflink incident had become a rumor, because palaces were built not of stone but of people carrying information badly. By supper, the rumor had acquired feathers. The laundry blamed insulted falcon lineage. The kitchen invented a snake. The footmen claimed Mara had caught the cufflink in her teeth, which sounded athletic and deeply unlikely. Mara tried to correct none of it. Low servants survived by being boring. Her mother had taught her to keep her head down, keep her hands busy, and never answer strange voices in public. That rule had followed the church pigeon incident, the hidden sugared plums, and a priest who still had not forgiven either Mara or the pigeon. Mara had learned caution. Valor had the subtlety of a dropped chandelier. The next morning, after a pearl button appeared in the seed bin and a black ribbon from the king's writing desk turned up beside the millet, Mara gave the birds a lecture about theft, privacy, and the difference between courtship and evidence tampering. Every bird in the room went silent. That was answer enough. By afternoon, she had polished Valor's Jessies, checked the bells, cleaned the hood, and discovered one more stolen object tucked beneath his perch, a small square of parchment covered in crossed-out words. She should not have read it, but the top line said, "Mistress Vel," and common sense had never once survived a bird-related crisis. Mara unfolded the parchment. "Mistress Vel, your work in the Mews has been noted. I wish to express..." The rest was crossed out with enough force to nearly tear the paper. Below it, another attempt began. "Mara." That had been crossed out even harder. The third attempt read, "The falcon seems to respond to your handling. Report to the west balcony at 4 bells." That version was not crossed out. Mara stared at the page, her face slowly warming. From the open window came a rush of wings. Valor landed on the sill with the triumph of a creature who had just delivered a siege engine. Written invitation acquired. Female reviewing. Progress efficient. "This is not an invitation," Mara whispered. "This is an order." Valor looked offended. He revised it 3 times. "That indicates emotional labor. It indicates he does not know how to speak to staff without sounding like a weather warning." "Correct. Training required." Mara tucked the parchment into her apron, intending to return the king's failed manners discreetly. That plan lived 12 seconds. Then Alpha King Alaric entered. He was not wearing the same coat as yesterday. This one was dark blue, close-fitted, and less severe around the throat. Mara noticed because Valor immediately told her to. Second coat selected after rejection of black. Black deemed intimidating. Blue deemed approachable. Approachability remains limited. Mara dropped the polishing cloth. Alaric looked at the cloth, then at her face, then at Valor on the window. "He brought you something." It was not a question. Mara's hand pressed automatically over her apron pocket. Valor raised one wing slightly. "Gift delivery successful. Male must now speak." Alaric went very still. Mara realized, with horror, that the king had seen exactly where her hand went. "Mistress Vel." His voice was palace calm, the kind that made everyone else wonder if they should evacuate. Mara drew the parchment from her pocket and held it out. "Valor took this from somewhere he should not have been." The falcon made a sharp protest. "Untrue. I was exactly where I needed to be." Alaric took the parchment. This time his fingers brushed the edge of her knuckle. It was barely contact. A breath of leather, nothing more. Valor went rigid with delight. Contact achieved. Minimal, but valid. Mara felt her ears heat. Alaric looked at the crossed-out lines. Embarrassment moved through his cold composure and was strangled before it made a sound. For a terrible moment, Mara felt sorry for the Alpha King whose falcon had delivered his unfinished note to a muse girl with straw on her sleeve. "I apologize," he said. Vaylor snapped his head toward him. Unexpected improvement. Mara blinked. "For valor?" The words cost him something. "It was not meant to be delivered like that." Valor gave a disapproving hiss. Delivery method was decisive. Mara folded her hands in front of her apron, partly to keep from fidgeting and partly to keep from laughing. "How was it meant to be delivered, Your Majesty?" Alaric looked as if he had entered a battle and found the enemy armed with teacups. "Through proper channels." Valor's voice turned grave. "He means never." Mara lost the fight. A small laugh escaped. She covered it badly with a cough. The king stared at her. Nobody in Briarfall Palace laughed in front of Alpha King Alaric Vane, but his falcon had just accused him of using proper channels as a burial ground for intention. Alaric's eyes narrowed, not dangerously, but like a man realizing there was a joke in the room and he had arrived late to it. "Is something funny?" Mara looked at Valor, who was now grooming one wing with theatrical innocence. "Only the situation, Your Majesty." "And the situation is?" Mara should have said nothing. She should have handed him the repaired jesses, lowered her eyes, and returned to being part of the floor. Instead, because birds had ruined her life long before this morning, she answered honestly. "Your falcon appears to have opinions about your correspondence." For 1 second, Alaric looked at Valor. Valor looked back with the expression of a general awaiting commendation. "He has opinions about everything," Alaric said. Mara's laugh tried to return. She pressed it down. "Yes, Your Majesty." Something like amusement passed through his eyes, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "The west balcony," he said, folding the parchment once. 4 bells, if your duties allow." Valor clicked his beak. Better. Still stiff. Acceptable for early-stage male. Mara lowered her gaze, but not before she saw the faint color rise along the king's cheekbones. He had not heard Valor. He could not have. Yet some part of him seemed to understand that his dignity had been pecked. "My duties allow," Mara said. "Good." Alaric turned to leave. Valor stepped onto his wrist, but not before dropping one final object onto the floor, the pearl button. Mara stared. Alaric stared. Valor looked satisfied. Additional gift, softer impact. Alaric closed his eyes for half a second. "Valor." The falcon chirped. Mara bent to pick up the button, her shoulders shaking. The west balcony at 4 bells smelled of rain, stone, leather, and high air. Wind moved constantly there, lifting banners, teasing loose hair from pins, and making the falcon bells sing. Mara arrived exactly on time with Valor's repaired jesses wrapped in cloth. She had brushed straw from her skirt and spent 3 minutes convincing a mirror that she looked like a normal servant, not a woman summoned by a king because his bird had stolen stationery. Alaric was already there. Of course he was. He stood near the stone rail with Valor on the padded stand beside him. His coat moved in the wind, and his dark hair had come slightly loose. Mara stopped at a respectful distance. Valor noticed. Female distance excessive. Male should reduce. Alaric turned. "Mistress Vel." "Your Majesty." The wind carried his scent to her. Clean wool, cold air, and the faint metallic note of power that all strong alphas carried. Predators did not unsettle Mara by existing. They unsettled her when they pretended not to be lonely. She held out the jesses. "Valor's left strap was wearing thin. I replaced it." Alaric took them and examined the stitches. He did not glance over them carelessly. He studied the work with real attention. "Clean stitching." Mara did not expect the warmth that spread through her. She had mended straps for half the palace birds. Compliments from the king should not matter. Valor leaned forward. Praise successful. Female brightened. "Repeat later." Mara almost dropped the cloth. Alaric looked up. "Are you cold?" "No, Your Majesty." Valor gave a disgusted click. "Poor opening. She is not cold." She is under direct wind, but does not shiver. Observe properly. Mara had to turn slightly toward the view so Alaric would not see her mouth twitch. The king must have mistaken the movement. Alaric offered to move inside if the height troubled her. The height did not trouble her. The falcon giving courtship instructions did. I am used to high places, Mara said. The east nesting tower has worse stairs. When Alaric asked if she climbed those, Mara told him someone had to, since the ravens refused to clean after themselves. A faint sound came from Vaylor, not quite a chirp. It might have been approval. Good. Practical female. Strong nest maintenance. Alaric's gaze shifted to the falcon. He likes you. Mara gave Vaylor a narrow look. He has an unusual way of showing it. He has an unusual way of showing most things. There it was again, the almost smile. The wind pressed Mara's skirt against her knees. Vaylor shuffled on his perch, bells chiming. For a few breaths, no one spoke. Alaric watched the sky as if it contained more honest company than people. Vaylor ruined the moment. Mael is staring at horizon to appear deep. He wishes to ask why you laugh at birds. Mara's face warmed. Alaric tragically chose that exact moment to speak. You seem to understand him. Mara's heart gave one hard beat. She kept her expression mild, the one she used when a pigeon revealed someone's affair and she had to continue filling water bowls. I spend more time with him than most. Rowan says he behaves better for you. Vaylor fluffed up. I behave with precision. He behaves differently, Mara said. Alaric studied her. Differently how? The truth sat on her tongue. He is trying to court me on your behalf, and I would like both of you to stop using my head as a landing site. She swallowed it. He is very focused when he wants something. Vaylor's voice rang with satisfaction. She understands leadership. Alaric looked at the falcon. Yes, he is. Then Vaylor launched himself into the wind. He rose sharply, silver wings flashing in the gray light, and circled once over the balcony. Mara expected him to begin the usual flight pattern. Instead, he dove toward the open doors behind them. Valor, Alaric called. The falcon ignored him. That alone was startling enough. Valor obeyed Alaric with the proud discipline of a creature who believed obedience was something he chose out of shared excellence, not necessity. He did not ignore commands. He vanished inside. Mara and Alaric looked at each other. From somewhere within the palace came a crash, a woman's shriek, and Valor's triumphant call in Mara's mind. Stage 2 begins. I have acquired floral object. They found him in the rose parlor, perched on a chandelier with a red rose in his beak, while Lady Celestine Harrow stood below him beside a broken vase. Vaylor dropped the rose directly into Mara's hands. Visual pairing achieved before witness. Strong improvement from cufflink. Lady Celestine looked at Mara as if a servant had just become a stain on the afternoon. Alaric's face remained winter calm, but the room grew colder. Mistress Vel maintains the royal muse, he told the noblewoman. Vaylor's fixation is likely a reflection of competence. Male defended female. Words formal but useful. Mara carried the falcon out on her sleeve before anyone could ask why the king's bird had obeyed a floor girl faster than he obeyed most generals. The rose incident should have ended things. It gave Vaylor confidence. Over the next week, he launched what Mara privately called the campaign of aerial nonsense. He dropped a blue ribbon into her wash bucket, placed Mara's hair tie on Alaric's breakfast tray, dragged a napkin through wet ink on the king's desk, and somehow arranged 2 sugared almonds in her apron pocket. Valor denied the almonds. Ink confessed proudly. I am expanding the courtship portfolio. By Friday, every bird in the mews had become unbearable. The doves cooed whenever Alaric's name was mentioned. The ravens arranged small objects in pairs. The kestrel began raiding the king's entrances. 6, she announced when he entered the mews that afternoon. Strong shoulders. Poor feather display. Mara nearly walked into a perch. Alaric caught the movement. Careful. It was not a command. It sounded like the word had escaped before he dressed it properly. Mara steadied herself. Valor looked between them. Care registered. Female responded. Courtship stable. No, Mara whispered while adjusting a glove. Alaric paused, and she saved herself by raising the glove. No damage. The stitching is sound. He accepted this with the expression of a man who suspected there was a conversation in the room and he had not been invited. When he crossed to Valor, rain clung to his coat and one loose strand of dark hair touched his temple. The Kestrel gave an immediate reassessment. 7. Dampness improves wildness. Mara turned so fast she knocked over a tin of brass polish. It clanged across the table, pigeons launched in panic, and ink shouted something vulgar enough to make a dove gasp. Alaric reached for the tin at the same time Mara did. Their hands stopped just short of touching. The space between their fingers was no wider than a feather. Valor sighed with theatrical suffering. Talons almost touched. Male retreated. Training regression. To address Valor's restlessness, Mara suggested supervised delivery training, which sounded professional and became a disaster with wings. In the West Garden, Valor was supposed to retrieve a red leather token and return it to Alaric's glove. He retrieved it perfectly, flew past the king, and dropped it into Mara's basket. On the second attempt, he repeated the error with confidence. On the third, he landed on the basket handle and looked at Alaric as though the lesson should now be obvious. Female receives offerings. Male observes and learns. They removed the basket. Valor dropped the token at Mara's feet. They moved her behind a hedge. Valor landed on top of the hedge and dropped the token into her hair. Mara pulled the token from a curl. Precision improved. Hair placement intimate. Strong work. Alaric covered his mouth with one gloved hand. His shoulders moved once, barely, but the fountain could not hide everything. The hedge was not effective, he managed. Mara smiled before she could stop herself. No, Your Majesty. 2 more training sessions followed. Gardeners trimmed the same hedge for 40 minutes. A footman crossed the garden 4 times with 1 empty tray. Lady Celestin watched from the rose path with noble innocence and hawk-level focus. Alaric noticed, "We can move training elsewhere." "If we move every time someone watches," Mara answered before caution caught up, "they learn watching works." His attention settled on her, sharp and quiet. "Servants are court attention's favorite furniture," she added. "People say things near us because they forget furniture has ears." Valor clicked his beak. Female has excellent intelligence network. Alaric asked what furniture heard, and Mara told him mostly complaints about other furniture. His laugh slipped out, low and surprised, before he could lock it away. From the hedge, a sparrow shouted, "No, furniture is not discreet." That afternoon, Valor refused to return to the mews. He circled above the garden and flew north toward the old rookery tower. Alaric went still. Bird voices drifted from the roofs, agitated and layered. Old bells, old leather, bad room. Silver bird remembers. Silver bird wants girl. Mara looked at the narrow dark tower. It looked forgotten on purpose. Alaric said Valor should not go there. Mara asked if she should fetch him, and his refusal came too quickly before he corrected himself. Not alone. Valor's distant cry came from the north. Mara heard the message beneath it, sharper than before. Come, both. She did not repeat it. She only met Alaric's eyes. Then, not alone. The north tower smelled of dust, old feathers, and iron. Mara climbed behind Alaric up a spiral stair so narrow his shoulders nearly brushed both walls. She stayed close enough to see the tension at his neck. Halfway up, a draft moved through the stones and carried a thin, sad chiming. Bells. Falcon bells. Old ones, not the bright, clean sound of Valor's. These were dull, uneven, as if the metal had forgotten why it had ever sung. Mara's ability did not work only in words. Birds spoke in language when they wished. More often, they spoke in images, flashes, body feeling, the memory of wind. In the North Tower, those memories pressed against her from every crack. Young wings held too tight, leather pulled harsh, a boy standing silent, a man's voice, cold with approval. Again. Mara stopped on the stair. Alaric stopped one step above her without turning. "What is it?" She held the wall. The stone was cold under her palm. "The birds hated this place." The words were out before she could soften them. Alaric did turn then. His face had gone very still. "What do you mean?" Mara had lied for years. She could lie now. She could say dust made her uneasy. She could say the old bells were unsettling. She could say any small, safe thing. Valor cried again above them. Not safe. True. Mara looked past Alaric to the curve of the stair. Some rooms keep a feeling. This one kept fear. For a long moment he said nothing. Wind moved above. Somewhere in the tower, Valor shifted, bells bright against the old dull echoes. Alaric resumed climbing. "My father trained falcons here." That was all he said, but it was enough. Mara heard the things he did not add. "My father trained me here too. My father believed gentleness ruined useful creatures. My father liked obedience better when it hurt." The top room of the tower was circular, open to the sky through arched windows. Old perches lined the walls. Torn hoods hung from pegs. A cracked leather gauntlet lay on a table beside a row of tarnished bells. Dust coated everything except Valor, who stood on the central perch like a judge. He looked at Mara. Old methods, bad methods. Male carries them in shoulders. Mara kept her hands still. Alaric walked to the table. He did not touch the old gauntlet. "I ordered this room sealed when I took the crown." His voice was even, which told Mara nothing except that he was very good at building walls. "Why?" He glanced at her. The question would have been impertinent from a courtier. From a floor girl, it was probably treason with a broom. But she had not asked like a courtier. She had asked like someone who had heard the old bells. Alaric looked back at the gauntlet. "Because nothing useful remained here." Valor flared his wings. "False. Memory remains. Wound remains. Also 3 mice." Mara decided not to mention the mice. She crossed to the nearest perch and ran one finger along a groove worn into the wood. The image came in a flash. A young falcon, tethered too short. A boy no older than 12, watching without expression. The boy's hands clenched behind his back. Not because he felt nothing, because he had already learned showing anything made the lesson last longer. Mara pulled her hand away. Alaric saw. "Do not touch the old equipment." His voice snapped, not loud, but sharp enough that Valor hissed. Mara did not flinch. She looked at him the way she looked at hawks who struck because they had once been handled badly. "I will not." The room settled. Alaric's jaw worked once. "That was not meant?" He stopped. "Apology attempt detected," Valor said. Mara waited. Alaric looked at the old perches, the bells, the table. When he spoke again, the command had gone out of him. Alaric admitted he was not accustomed to people touching things from this room. Mara told him she understood, and his tired question asked whether she really did. The question was not cruel. It was tired. Mara thought of her first week in the palace, when a cook had found her whispering to an injured pigeon and crossed herself. She thought of years spent swallowing answers because birds knew too much and people feared what they could not control. "Yes," she said. "Some things become easier to lock away than explain." Alaric looked at her then, not at the servant, not at the muse girl, at her. Valor became very quiet. For once, no bird made a joke. The silence should have been heavy. Instead, it opened. Then Ink the Raven landed on the windowsill with a stolen biscuit in his beak. "I found the mice." Mara exhaled a laugh so suddenly she had to cover her mouth. Alaric closed his eyes. "Is that raven yours?" "No one owns Ink." Ink swallowed the biscuit. "Correct." Valor snapped his beak at the raven. "This is a solemn instructional moment." Ink hopped farther into the room. "Then why is everyone standing badly?" The spell broke. Not entirely. Enough to let breath back in. Mara looked at the old gauntlet again. This room does not need to stay sealed. Alaric's attention returned to her. No? No. It needs cleaning. His brows drew together slightly. Mara could almost see him trying to reconcile old pain with broom logistics. Cleaning. Dust holds smell. Old leather holds fear. Birds know the difference between a dead room and a safe one. So do wolves, I think. His face gave nothing away, but his hand flexed once at his side. Valor stepped down from the central perch and hopped to the old table. Female proposes nest rehabilitation. Ink pecked at a cobweb. Also mice relocation. Alaric looked around the tower. The wind moved through the high windows, stirring dust into gold. And you would clean it? Mara regretted her mouth immediately. If ordered. That is not what I asked. The correction was quiet. Mara met his eyes. Yes, she said, if allowed. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly. The difference between a locked door and one with a hand on the latch. Then we will begin tomorrow. Mara blinked. We! Alaric looked at the old perches with the grim focus of a king preparing for war against dust. It is my tower. Valor's voice filled with awe. Male volunteers for nest labor. Courtship advanced beyond projections. Mara turned toward the window and pretended to cough. Cleaning the North Tower took 6 mornings, 3 buckets of soap, 1 replacement broom, and more of Alpha King Alaric Vane's time than any counselor believed reasonable. At first, everyone assumed he was inspecting. Kings inspected. They did not scrub. Then a footman saw him carrying a broken perch down the north stairs, and by evening the palace rumor claimed Mara had identified a curse using bird bones. Alaric arrived the next morning with a cleaning rag and a face like a storm front. Apparently you are a bone witch, he remarked. Mara wrung dirty water from a cloth. Only on Thursdays. Valor made a delighted sound from the central beam. Humor exchange. Smooth. Male should respond. Alaric considered the bucket. It is Thursday. Mara stared. The king's expression did not change, but his eyes warmed by a fraction, and her laugh escaped before caution could catch it. Ink from the window added, The Bone Witch approves. The work changed things in small, dusty ways. Alaric returned each morning without being summoned. He repaired brass hooks, listened when Mara explained perches and screens, and proved that command of armies did not translate into command of a broom. The first time she handed him one, he held it like a spear. Not like that, Mara corrected before fear could stop her. It is a broom, not a duel. Valor nearly fell off his perch. Female corrects weapon posture. Excellent. Alaric adjusted his grip with grave dignity. The second sweep created a dust cloud that made Ink sneeze. I have been attacked by history, the Raven declared. Alaric apologized to him. Mara had to sit down. By the 4th morning, the king no longer looked like a man visiting an old wound. He looked like a man repairing something he had not known was allowed to be repaired. He asked questions about the birds. He remembered the answers. He learned that hawks hated sudden cloth movements, that ravens lied for sport, and that doves were not peaceful but merely soft-looking. One morning, while Mara polished the old silver bells, he stood beside the open window and watched Valor fly loops around the tower. He has been different, Alaric said. Mara turned a bell in her fingers. Valor? Yes. Different how? Alaric's gaze stayed on the falcon. Less sharp. Mara smiled faintly. He would be offended. I know. The admission was so dry that she glanced up. There was humor in his face now, still restrained, still careful, but present. Valor landed on the sill. I am not less sharp. I am relieved. Mara's fingers stilled on the bell. Alaric noticed the change in her face and asked what she had heard. She looked at the falcon, whose golden eyes had lost their usual militant gleam. I think he likes the room better. When Alaric asked if cleanliness was enough, Mara answered that the room was not only what it had been. Alaric was quiet. The wind carried soap, stone, and mountain rain. The old fear had not vanished, but now it shared space with lemon oil, open air, raven complaints, and a king learning how to use a broom. Sometimes healing did not erase a room. Sometimes it added better memories until the old ones had less room to echo. Alaric reached toward one of the polished bells, then stopped. May I? Mara's throat tightened. It was such a small question. A king asking permission to touch an old falcon bell. Yet she heard what it cost him. Men raised to take did not always know how to ask. Yes, she said. He picked up the bell. It chimed softly. Valar bowed his head. The sound was thin, bright, and no longer sad. That evening, Valar delivered a gift that was not stolen. Mara found it on the work table in the mews, placed neatly on a square of clean cloth. A silver-gray feather, long, perfect, and unmistakably Valar's. She touched it with one finger. Ink hopped closer. That is not theft. I know. Concerning. Valar watched from his perch, pretending indifference with every feather on his body. Trust token, not romantic. Falcon tradition. Mara looked at him. Thank you. He looked away. You may keep it if you do not become dramatic. I would never. Ink coughed. Valar's head snapped around. Do not comment, black nuisance. Mara was still smiling when Alaric entered the mews. He stopped just inside the door. He had changed from formal court dress into a dark, simple coat. No crown, no ceremonial silver at his throat. He looked tired, but not hollow. There was dust on one sleeve, likely from the tower, and he had not noticed. Mara noticed. So did Valar. Mail arrives without excuse, the falcon said. Significant. Alaric's gaze moved to the feather on the table. Alaric noticed Valar had given her the feather. Mara confirmed it, and the king told her Valar had never given anyone a flight feather. Valar inspected one talon, because most humans are unstable perches. Mara held the feather carefully. Should I return it? Alaric looked at Valar. Valar looked at the ceiling. No, Alaric said. If he gave it, he meant it. The quiet in the mews changed. Birds settled. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere in the back, a dove cooed in her sleep. The room smelled of straw, feathers, leather, and the faint sweetness of the apple Mara had hidden from Ink and failed to protect. Alaric stepped closer to the work table. I came without a note, he said. Mara looked up. His expression was composed, but not cold. There was a tension in him, a carefulness that reminded her of the first time a wounded hawk chose not to strike. Without Valar stealing one? She asked. Yes. Valar made a quiet, triumphant sound. Independent male action confirmed. Mara lowered her eyes to the feather because looking directly at Alaric felt too much like stepping into weather. That seems efficient. It seems overdue. The words landed softly, but they changed the air. Mara did not rush to answer. She needed the silence. She needed to understand that the king had come to the mews with no lost cufflink, no stolen ribbon, no training session, no proper channel. Only himself. Alaric rested one hand on the edge of the table, not close enough to touch her. Close enough to be a choice. Alaric said Valar had been interfering. Mara agreed. He added aggressively, with poor respect for property, and she agreed again because denial would have insulted every stolen object in the palace. Valar lifted both wings. Results matter. Mara bit her cheek. Alaric saw the movement. This time, instead of looking confused, he looked almost resigned. He is saying something. Mara froze. Rain ticked against the glass. Alaric did not move closer. He did not demand. He simply watched her, and for the first time since she had come to Briarfall, Mara wondered if being seen might not be the same thing as being caught. Why do you think that? Because you make that face when he does. Mara's fingers tightened around the feather. What face? The face of someone trying not to laugh at my expense. Valar gave a piercing cry of approval. Mail observes! Tremendous progress! Mara lost the fight again. A laugh slipped out, helpless and warm. Alaric's mouth softened. I see. Mara set the feather down with great care. She could deny it. She had lied to priests, Cooks, falconers, and one suspicious goose, but Alaric had stood in the north tower and asked permission to touch a bell. He had carried broken perches. He had apologized to a raven. Some people earned a portion of truth. "I hear birds," she said. The words were quiet. They felt enormous anyway. Alaric did not recoil. He did not cross himself, laugh, or call for guards. His gaze moved once to Valor, who stood very tall on his perch. "All birds?" Mara swallowed. "Most. Some are clearer than others. Valor is unfortunately extremely clear." Valor bowed, honored. Alaric's eyes flickered. "Unfortunately. He has described your coat choices in detail." The silence that followed was spectacular. Ink whispered from the back. "Tell him about the blue one." Mara pressed her lips together. Alaric looked slowly at Valor. The falcon became very interested in his wing. "My coat choices," the king repeated. Mara clarified that the commentary was only recent, which made Alaric ask how recent. Mara considered mercy, then remembered the cufflink. The blue coat was deemed more approachable. Alaric closed his eyes. Valor spoke with dignity. It was. When Alaric opened his eyes again, there was color along his cheekbones. It was the most human Mara had ever seen him look. "Anything else?" Mara glanced at Valor. The falcon looked back with the calm of a soldier prepared for honorable death. "He believes your courtship skills require training." Ink made a choking sound. Several pigeons woke up. Alaric stared at Valor for a long moment. "Courtship," Mara nodded once. "Training," Mara confirmed the dreadful word. The king's face moved through several states of dignity, disbelief, betrayal, and something perilously close to amusement. He named the cufflink, the rose, and the hair tie on his breakfast tray. Mara translated each offense as Stage 1, visual pairing, and, with a wince, scent association. Valor clicked his beak. "Correct." Alaric leaned one hand against the table and bowed his head. For one alarming second, Mara thought he was angry. Then his shoulders moved. He was laughing, quietly, almost silently, but laughing. It built in him like something unused, finding its way back to life. Not the brief garden laugh. This was deeper, warmer, and more dangerous to Mara's ability to remain sensible. Valor looked smug enough to be unbearable. Male joy sustained. My methods vindicated. Mara laughed too then, because there was no other reasonable response to the Alpha King of Briarfall, discovering that his falcon had been running a courtship campaign with stolen office supplies. When the laughter eased, Alaric looked at her. The guardedness had not vanished, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a wall, more like a door left partly open because the room inside had finally been aired. "I should be mortified." Mara observed that he seemed to be managing. Alaric called the effort poor, and she warned him Valor would agree. The falcon gave a satisfied chirp. Alaric looked at her for a long moment, and his voice, when it came, was quieter. "Did he make all of it up?" The question was not about the falcon. Mara knew that. She thought of the notes crossed out until the paper almost tore. The way he had returned to the tower each morning. The way he had defended her in the rose parlor with formal words that carried more care than they admitted. The way he had come tonight with no excuse. "No," she said. Alaric's fingers curled once against the table edge. Mara continued before courage failed. "But I think he began before you were ready." Valor opened his beak. Mara pointed at him without looking away from Alaric. "Do not argue." The falcon closed his beak. Ink whispered, "Magnificent." Alaric's expression softened into something she had no defense against. "He was right about one thing," he said. Mara felt the room narrow to his voice. "Which thing?" "I have been finding reasons to come here." No stolen object fell. No bird interrupted. Even Valor held still, as if he understood that some moments could not be improved by strategy. Alaric's gaze stayed on Mara. "At first, I told myself it was Valor, then the tower, then training, then the noise in the court. There was always a reason. His mouth curved faintly, self-aware and rueful. Tonight, I decided to stop insulting both of us. Mara's heart beat very carefully. He did not reach for her. He did not crowd. He left the choice in the space between them, as carefully as he had left his hand near hers, without touching. I would like to see you tomorrow, he said. Not for valor, not for the tower, not because of a missing object. Valor trembled with the effort of silence. Mara could feel every bird in the room listening. She should have been terrified. A sensible woman would have been terrified. The Alpha King had just offered her something that was not exactly a proposal, not exactly a command, and not at all safe for a woman who cleaned perches and kept impossible secrets. But Mara had spent years listening to birds. She knew the difference between a predator striking and a creature offering its wrist. Tomorrow, she said, I have to repair the east aviary screens. Alaric's face went still. Mara let him suffer for exactly one heartbeat. You may help, if you can promise not to hold the hammer like a weapon. Relief moved through him so quickly it almost broke her. Valor exploded into sound. Acceptance! Skilled female sets labor trial. Excellent pairing structure. Ink shouted, Bring biscuits! The pigeons began cooing without dignity. Alaric looked around the mews as if the entire bird population had become a council he could not dismiss. He asked if they were all commenting, and Mara tucked Valor's feather safely into her apron before confirming that they were. When he asked whether he wanted to know, she spared him. No. He considered that. Will you tell me anyway? Mara looked at him, at the king who had once seemed carved from winter and now stood in a room full of birds, asking to be included in the ridiculous truth. Some of it. Valor gave a final, satisfied rustle. Training successful. Continued supervision required. Alaric sighed. I heard nothing, and yet I feel judged. You are. The smile that crossed his face was small, real, and entirely his. The days that followed became stranger, which suited Mara better. Alaric helped repair the east aviary screens, accepted correction on his alarming hammer grip, and looked mildly betrayed when Valor tried to arrange an accidental hand touch with a dropped nail. I am refining technique, Valor insisted. You are interfering, Mara told him. Alaric, who had begun to understand when he was the subject of Falcon criticism, asked whether Valor was offended. Deeply, Mara told him. Good. Male ingratitude severe. Mara laughed, and Alaric watched as if he had begun to expect laughter and was pleased to find it. He still attended councils with his Cold King's face, but now he came to the mews without pretending Valor required examination. Sometimes he brought broken equipment. Once he brought a falconry book from the library. Mara read 3 pages, decided the author had clearly never been bitten, and Alaric sent it away. Scholar dismissed. Female expertise recognized. Valor approved. The birds were unbearable. The kestrel rated Alaric's emotional progress as 7, with too much jaw. The doves composed harmonies. Ink called him Biscuit King because Alaric had fed him once. Valor remained the worst. If Alaric stood too far away, Valor shifted closer to Mara. If Alaric became too formal, Valor dropped something. If Mara worked too long without eating, Valor stole fruit and blamed a sparrow. One rainy evening, Alaric found Mara in the north tower, hanging the last of the polished bells. The room had changed. Clean perches lined the walls. Fresh screens softened the windows. The old gauntlet sat in a glass case. Valor's feather lay beside the restored silver bell. Mara stood on a stool, tying a cord. Rain whispered through the screens. The tower smelled of clean wood and wet stone. Alaric crossed the room quickly. Careful. Mara looked down at him. I am on a stool, not a cliff. The stool is old. You are older than the stool. The words were out before she could stop them. Silence. Valor, perched above, went very still. Ink, who had followed Alaric in hopes of biscuits, whispered, Bold? Mara looked at Alaric in horror. Then he laughed, not quietly this time. A real laugh, startled out of him, warm enough to make the old bells tremble. Mara stepped down from the stool before her knees could become unreliable. I apologize. Do not. He was still smiling. She had no idea what to do with that. A smiling Alpha King was not in any servant manual. Alaric looked around the tower. It is different. Yes. Because of you. Mara shook her head. Because of soap, wind, and a falcon with no respect for privacy. Vaylor ruffled. Privacy prevents progress. Alaric's gaze returned to her. Because of you, he repeated. The room went soft at the edges. Mara could have made another joke. Humor was easier than standing still under the weight of being seen. But Alaric had learned to ask, and perhaps she could learn not to hide. It is different because you came back to it, she said. The smile faded, but not into coldness. He looked at the old gauntlet in its case and admitted he had thought sealing it would stop it from mattering. Mara asked if it had. No. The answer was simple. Honest. He looked almost relieved to have said it. Mara stood close enough that their sleeves nearly touched. Birds do not forget bad handling, she said. But they can learn the hand is different now. Alaric looked down at his own hand. Can wolves? Mara thought of all the times Vaylor had spoken around the thing in Alaric that no one else named. The wolf beneath the king. The creature trained to be silent, controlled, useful, feared. I think so. He turned his hand palm up between them, not touching her, asking. Mara's breath caught. Vaylor made a tiny sound overhead. No strategy now. Just answer. Mara placed her hand in Alaric's. His fingers closed around hers slowly, as if the good thing might vanish if held too quickly. His hand was warm, solid, and roughened from work in an old tower. Rain moved softly against the screens. The bells chimed once. Alaric exhaled. It was not dramatic. It was not a declaration. It was the sound of someone setting down a weight he had carried so long he had mistaken it for part of his body. Mara's throat tightened. Ink ruined it gently. Does hand-holding mean biscuits? Mara laughed into her free hand. Alaric looked at the raven. No. Ink considered this. Then I oppose it. Valor spread his wings with great dignity. Ignore him. Ceremony successful. Alaric looked at Mara. I assume they are commenting. Yes. Favorably? Mara glanced at Valor, who looked like a commander watching a treaty signed after a long and unnecessary campaign. Mostly. Alaric's thumb moved once across her knuckles. I will accept mostly. The next morning, the palace woke to an event so small, most histories would ignore it, and so important that every bird in Briarfall repeated it for days. Alpha King Alaric Vane entered the royal mews carrying a basket. Not a report. Not a broken strap. Not a stolen object returned under protest. A basket. Inside were apples for the birds, seed cakes for the doves, dried meat for the hawks, and, because Alaric had apparently lost all fear of corruption, biscuits for Ink. Rowan the falconer saw the basket and had to sit down. Mara stood by the work table with Vaylor on her glove, watching the king distribute offerings like a man paying debts to a feathered army. The doves approved. The kestrel gave the entrance an 8. Ink accepted a biscuit and declared himself open to future negotiations. Vaylor waited until Alaric stood before Mara. The king removed one final item from the basket. It was a small leather tie, dyed deep blue, suitable for binding back hair while working. It was simple, practical, and not stolen. Mara looked at it. Alaric held it out. I was advised that throwing it would be ineffective. Mara's gaze flew to Valor. The falcon looked away. I have matured. Ink snorted biscuit crumbs. Mara took the tie. Her fingers brushed Alaric's. No one retreated. Thank you, she said. Alaric's voice lowered enough that the birds nearest them went still. You are welcome. Valor leaned forward. Mail delivered appropriate gift by hand. No head injury. Exceptional improvement. Mara smiled down at the blue leather. Valor says you have improved. Alaric looked at the falcon. High praise. Extremely. He looked back at her. The mews hummed around them with wings, bells, rain, and quiet morning warmth. And you? He asked. Mara tied her hair back with the blue leather. It held perfectly. She took a moment to answer, because some answers deserved to be placed carefully. I think, she said, you are no longer letting the falcon do all the work. Alaric's smile was small, but this time he did not hide it. That is also improvement. Valor settled his feathers with deep satisfaction. Courtship training ongoing. Prognosis favorable. Ink hopped closer. Biscuit supply critical to success. Mara laughed. Alaric reached for another biscuit with the grave dignity of a king who had accepted that romance, like falconry, required patience, trust, and occasional bribery. Outside, the morning opened bright over Briarfall's towers. The North Tower bells rang once in the wind, clear and no longer sad. Valor lifted his wings and rose toward the light, circling high above the mews like a silver mark against the sky. For once, he did not drop anything. Mara watched him fly, Alaric standing close beside her, near enough that their shoulders almost touched. Almost. Then, after a small pause that felt very much like a choice, they did. Valor's voice drifted down from above, smug and bright as a bell. Finally.